one going to be?
The people of Afghanistan have seen war for much of the past 40 years. From the Soviet invasion of the late 1970s to the rise of the Taliban in the 1990s and its eventual fall from power in late 2001. There have been 6 democratic elections since then, but finding consensus among Afghanistan's competing and diverse political groups has been challenging. While the Taliban continued its attacks against civilians and government targets, Afghan forces and their allies have spent years fighting the group. But after years of conflict, where civilians were often the victims, it's become clear the way forward is through negotiations. Earlier this year, the United States signed an agreement with the Taliban facilitating a withdrawal of its troops. In return, the Taliban agreed not to support any other armed groups or attack US forces or their allies. The agreement came after nearly 7 years of efforts to facilitate political reconciliation between the Taliban, the Afghan government, the US and other countries. Years earlier, Qatar had agreed to open a political office in Doha for the Taliban, where negotiations could be held. I'm Osama bin Javed in Doha. After long-fought negotiations and several delays, the Afghan government is finally talking to the Taliban. But as negotiations continue here in the Qatari capital, fighting has not stopped in Afghanistan. On September the 12th, representatives of the Afghan government and the Afghan Taliban met here with the goal of ending a devastating conflict which has displaced millions of Afghans. One of the main players in the peace process has been Afghan-born American diplomat Zalmay Khalilzad, who has led the efforts to achieve peace in Afghanistan on behalf of the United States since September 2018. So having made it this far, what's next in the Afghan peace process, and what role will Washington play? The US Special Representative for Afghanistan's reconciliation, Zalmay Khalilzad, talks to Al Jazeera. Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, US Special Representative for Afghan reconciliation, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
It's good to be with you.
Trillions of dollars spent, nearly 19 years later. The United States thinks that it is now time for the Afghans to sort out Afghanistan themselves. You call it a historic opportunity. Why?
Well, for 19 years, there has been an effort to end the war in Afghanistan by having an agreement that's broadly supported in Afghanistan on a political roadmap, and also an agreement that Afghanistan never again would be a threat to the international community. And of course, we worry about the United States in particular. After all, it was the 9/11 attack that led the US and coalition forces to come to Afghanistan. And we had the first time in this, at least 20 years, some say you could go back even longer, since Afghans have been in a war situations for 40 plus years, that they're meeting authoritatively, both sides, broadly representative delegation from Kabul, an empowered delegation from the Taliban, positive tone, meeting afterwards, after the opening, to establish a group, one from each side, to discuss the agenda and next steps in the negotiations. So I think for Afghanistan, it definitely is a historic moment, a moment of opportunity, a moment of hope.
This is happening at a time where they're exchanging pleasantries here in the Qatari capital, but on the ground, in the 24 hours right after both sides met, you heard the Afghan government say that there have been 18 provinces where there have been small or medium attacks. Afghan Taliban saying that this is propaganda from the government side. Does that sound like two parties willing to negotiate with each other?
Of course, they're negotiating. It doesn't not only sound like it, it is negotiation that's going on. But the negotiations are taking place to build trust. There is a mutual mistrust. The negotiations are taking place to reduce violence. That's our expectation. The negotiations are taking place to deal with or overcome the differences that has resulted or is the cause for the fight, to find a formula for resolving those differences in terms of at least a formula in which it doesn't mean the Talibs agree to change their ideology, or the government, other groups change their ideology, but how, given that there will be differences in values, differences in ideology, they can live together, agree on a political formula that's workable, and then implement it. And it will be difficult. I don't anticipate, although I'd be very pleasantly surprised that this will be easy and they quickly will come to an agreement. But the door to inter-Afghan negotiation has been opened, and given our role, we're very pleased that we have arrived at this phase from an American-led diplomacy for peace in Afghanistan to an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led peace process.
Well, you call it an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led process.
Right.
But this has been made possible by excluding the Afghan government from the initial agreement that was signed between the United States and the Taliban.
Sure.
You had to pressure the Afghan government to release 5,000 prisoners. We saw the back and forth in that as well. So when the basis of this is being forced upon the Afghan government by the United States, do you really think that it is truly Afghan-owned and Afghan-led?
Well, I said it was American-led until the American agreement with the Taliban signed on February 29th. And the U.S. and allied NATO and Afghan joint declaration on the same day that opened the door. We wish that the Afghan government and the Taliban could have met 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2 years ago, but it took American engagement and American diplomatic leadership, an agreement with the Talibs, and some difficult decisions by all sides. I'm appreciative of the government of Afghanistan for the tough decisions that it took. Yeah, we all had to make difficult decisions. The United States made some difficult decisions as well. So, but that's what was required.
Well, I'm quite sure you've seen the press back home that on the eve of 9/11, the United States was pushing the Afghan government to release 6 prisoners and send them to Qatar. You've seen the opposition from the French as well. There is a lot of opposition back home in the United States and also from various circles in Afghanistan as well, that the United States has given too much weight to the Taliban. Is that the case?
Well, we are not happy about the release of some of those prisoners.
Yet you facilitated it.
Yes, because we wanted something that was very important, is very important for Afghanistan, for the international community. We wanted Afghans to sit and negotiate an end to the war, which is, I don't think any country that's unhappy about the release of prisoners, as I said, we are too, would have said, no, let the war go on. We appreciate their expression of unhappiness and empathize with them, but we think the goal of making Afghanistan to be more peaceful, for Afghans to come together, to end the war, for Afghanistan not to be a threat to the international community, and for the burden of Afghanistan to reduce on the international community. As you referred to at the beginning of the program, are significant goals and objectives, and sacrifices had to be made, tough decisions, difficult decisions had to be made. If nothing important is easy, unfortunately, to achieve, and we had to do those tough things, difficult things, heart-wrenching things, to get to where we are. We are satisfied that the objective that we have in front of us is worth the sacrifices or the tough decisions that have to be made.
Well, let's talk about the specific tougher decisions that lie ahead. The constitution of Afghanistan, the status of Afghan National Army, what is going to be the status of Taliban fighters, what happens to the rights of all Afghans, including women and minorities. So what assurances do you have, apart from the promises that the Taliban have made, that they'll adhere to their side of the bargain?
For one thing, if they don't adhere to their commitment that they have made to us under our agreement with them, then we're free from our obligations that we have made with them. It's not based on hope, it's not based on trust, it's based on, it's a deal, it's a package deal. You do this, we'll do this. If they don't do this, we don't do that. So that is what I count on, and that the agreement is as phases, as conditions, and that we will adhere to our side, provided that the other side adheres to its commitment. Now, when it comes to the future issues, we have our hopes, we have our desires, we have our expectations, but it's now up to the Afghans. Many people wouldn't have anticipated even a few months ago that this would happen, given the gaps that exist, the mistrust that exists between the two sides. But here you have a very empowered Talib delegation. I think they take the negotiations very seriously. They have prepared for it. And we have a very broad-based representative, largely Afghan delegation with senior people involved that also has come well prepared. So they're taking this seriously, in my view, although there are spoilers inside and out. But as I said, it will be difficult.
Is it worth identifying what those spoilers are?
Well, there are people who like the status quo better than a peace agreement. They are politically profiting from the status quo. They're financially profiting from the status quo. They have fears of what might happen in terms of their relative power positions in an agreement. Understandable, but you know, when you look at it from a broader national interest point of view, those are sort of putting small interests ahead of that broader national interest, and that is obviously not acceptable. But there are such people. There are groups who are against the peace process, and Afghans coming together. They want to keep the U.S. entangled in a war, and that's like Daesh in Afghanistan, which is trying to polarize the situation. Some of the attacks, in my judgment, the most dastardly attacks have been Daesh attacks. They've tried to pretend as if it was the Taliban, so to undermine the peace process. You know, I served in Iraq, and when we were trying to bring the various forces in Iraq together, and there was this attack on Askaria Mosque that polarized the situation, and I worry that every day that some force might do something dastardly there that could undermine it. There are regional issues. Afghanistan's conflict is quite complex in terms of number of players, some because of problems in relation with us, who would like to cause problems in Afghanistan, some because of rivalries with each other, and we have tried to be active not only in engagement with the Afghan side, but also regionally and internationally to build a consensus for peace in Afghanistan. For I think that not only there is a need for a broad agreement among Afghans for it to work, but also a broad international support for it.
I asked you about the obligations of the Taliban because there is a certain timeline that you're working with. I have spoken to members of the delegation who feel rushed by the United States as well into this agreement. Obviously, this is an election year. You have to withdraw your troops, according to the president, in 14 months. So how is it going to work if the Afghans themselves are working on a U.S. timeline?
Well, they're not working on a U.S. timeline, but I think they're under pressure from their people who want the war to end, who are suffering. You pointed out what the Ministry of Defense had said at the beginning. Every day, Afghans are dying. Thank God there hasn't been an American dead in Afghanistan since February 29, because we have an agreement with the Talibs. But we have the right to come to the defense of the Afghan forces if they come under attack. The urgency, the Afghans should feel it the most. As I said, yes, President Trump's policies are well known, that he would like to end the war, bring the troops home. And we have said it repeatedly to the Afghans that being in Afghanistan militarily is not an end in itself for us. It's condition-based, as long as if we can be assured this framework that we agreed with Taliban, which has 4 elements: terrorism assurances, inter-Afghan negotiation complete, and permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of international forces. It's a package arrangement. So we would like to see progress on all fronts, and we have agreed, if all of these conditions are met within 14 months, we will withdraw. And we are in phase 2. We are going to arrive at around 4,500 by the end of November, plus our allied forces, and we'll see what the circumstances are at that time. We can still carry out the mission that our forces have.
But you do realize that this gives a certain propaganda tool for the Afghan Taliban, who've been quoting the words of the Secretary of State in February when he called Afghanistan a graveyard of empires. There, if you look at the statements not from Doha but from Kabul, they're very different in tone to what you're seeing from here. So is there a duplicity at play here, and how do you counter it?
No, there is no duplicity. But if Afghanistan, everybody had agreed to everything, we wouldn't have this war. And so it's not surprising, it would be naive to expect that all of a sudden everybody embraces each other and agree on everything. Certainly, we appreciate the concerns that the Afghan government has. We've assured them in our joint declaration that we remain committed to the agreements and commitments that we have with them. And at the same time, we have this agreement with the Taliban, and the joint declaration took the key elements of the agreement that we have with the Taliban is in that joint statement with the Afghan government, and the elements that are in the joint declaration is in the U.S.-Taliban agreement. And the Afghan government must have seen that we have honored and continue to honor all our commitments. As I said, when their forces are attacked, we come to the defense of those forces, and we will continue to do so.
Let's quickly talk about the future of Afghanistan. If all of these 4 phases are completed, are finished, the United States, what is going to be the U.S. engagement? Because many people fear that right after the Soviet war ended, the United States and its allies left Afghanistan on its own. That's when things really became from bad to worse. And what assurances have you given to the people of Afghanistan, to the Afghan government, to all parties of the conflict, that the U.S. is not going to abandon them? And how are you going to make sure that the United States remains relevant in Afghanistan?
Well, you know, I'm old enough, and I've been involved in diplomacy, including dealing with Afghanistan for some time. And a serious error was made at the end of the Soviet period. One, actually, it's more than one error, but one was not to try to do what we're doing now with Afghan forces, the Mujahideen who fought the Soviets, and the other Afghans, to get to a political agreement, to have negotiations like the one among Afghans, so that as the withdrawal was being carried out by the Soviet forces, there was order, an agreement, and a political process among the forces in play. So, that was because of lack of trust between the United States and the Soviet Union at that time. Many people didn't think the Soviets were serious about withdrawal. But also, the Afghans who had sacrificed so much to push the Soviets out, to force them out, and the world benefited from that Soviet departure and what followed that departure, which is the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But the Afghans, who had won a great victory at huge cost, failed politically by going to civil war against each other. I hope the Afghans are paying attention, learning the lessons of that period. We certainly have learned that lesson, and that's why we've started this peace process to get the Afghans to negotiate. That's why I call it a historic opportunity to avoid another historic mistake, which many Afghans admit happened as the Soviets were withdrawing and afterwards.
You yourself have roots to Afghanistan.
Sure.
Can you just tell us in the end, what is at stake here? What if they fail, where there's lots of fears by lots of sides,
Yes.
that they're so rigid in their positions.
Yes.
The Afghan government wants an immediate ceasefire. The Taliban immediately wants a government where they have a say at the table. What is at stake here? What if they fail?
A lot is at stake, first and foremost for the Afghans, for the Afghan people. As I said, they're suffering every day. They're tired of the war. I mean, Afghans are killing each other right now. As I said, thank goodness, in our own case, it isn't happening. So I just don't think the Afghan people will understand the leaders who will, either Talib or the government, if they lose this opportunity. I think they would not be true to their people if they did that. So I think they feel that pressure. They feel that pressure, that yearning that is there for peace. But they are also under pressure from us. They're also under pressure from other international players. We're watching them. We're going to monitor these negotiations. And we'll help if that help is needed. But ultimately, now we're in a different phase in which the Afghans are in the seat. They can't blame the United States. They can't blame others. They are eyeing each other, eyeing the current generation's losses that they are suffering, the aspirations and the circumstances of future generations of Afghans, not to lose this opportunity, but to rise and take advantage of this historic opportunity. And if they do, the United States wants to assure Afghanistan that we would be a good partner. We want a good legacy behind in Afghanistan, and that we would like to see this war end.
Finally, there is United States, there is the Afghan Taliban, but there are also regional players
Yes.
here. You alluded to the fact that they are very heavily involved in Afghanistan. Right. Is the United States leaving Afghanistan going to leave a void which will be filled by either regional actors or other major powers in the region?
Well, we want to have the region play a positive role with regard to peace. I think the region will benefit from peace in Afghanistan. War produces refugees that undermine the economy of the neighbors. War creates blockage for trade across the region. Peace will create the opportunity for connectivity for Central Asia with South Asia and the world, for trade, for investment. Afghanistan can be, we have said it for a long time, a kind of land bridge connecting Central Asia to South Asia and beyond. And we're prepared to invest in it. It is going to be a non-zero-sum situation. Everyone could benefit. That could be the unintended benefit for the region. Peace for the Afghans, security for the world, prosperity and cooperation for the region. This is also a moment of opportunity for the region to seize. But there are rivalries, there are mistrust as well. But other regions have overcome that. I'm old enough again to remember post-Vietnam discussions about dominoes in Southeast Asia, and now look how prosperous and cooperative that region has become. Europe has overcome centuries of conflict. Why can't this region, including where we are sitting, also learn from the lessons of other regions? There is nothing in the DNA that's different fundamentally than others. So I think there could be a lesson from Afghanistan that could be positive for the region as well.
Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, Special Representative for Afghan Reconciliation, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Well, it's good to be with you. Thank you.
On the next episode of Talk to Al Jazeera, we speak to another key player in the peace process, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, who is the chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation in Afghanistan.